So, the Philadelphia Convention, that meeting that Madison talked about, that Madison planned at the Annapolis Convention. In May 1787, 55 delegates from all the states except Rhode Island met in Philadelphia. Now, these men were not necessarily experts on government. They were, on average, better read and more wealthy than your typical American, but they are not all experts on government. They might have served in government, but for the most part, their day jobs consisted of being lawyers or merchants or planters, wealthy farmers from the South. They are wealthy. And the fact that they are wealthy means that we're not going to see any radical economic ideas coming out of this convention like land or wealth redistribution in the United States. One of the first rules that is passed at the Philadelphia Convention is what I call the Fight Club rule. And that is that the entire convention will be held in absolute secrecy. They don't want any detrimental rumors about things at the convention getting out. They also want to let the delegates have truly open to debate and say things that might be best for the nation, but might not look best to the people in their state. This makes the Philadelphia Convention, or the Constitutional Convention as we call it, very difficult for us to interpret today because there are very few notes for what was said or what happened. Another decision that they make is that even though the Articles of Confederation said that you needed 9 out of 13 votes to make a law and you needed unanimous support to make an amendment, they're just going to go with majority rule, 7 out of 13 votes to pass something at the Philadelphia Convention. This is very important. This means something's going to get done. This very complicated diagram is showing James Madison's Virginia plan. Let me give you some of the highlights. This is one of the first things brought up at the Philadelphia Convention, at the Constitutional Convention. And this is Madison's plan for the new strong central government. Madison calls for a legislature, a lawmaking body, where representation is determined by population. It would be a bicameral or two-house legislature, where one of the houses is directly elected by the people and the other is appointed by the state assemblies. It would have a chief executive that's appointed by Congress, and the central government would be able to veto state laws. So the central government would have authority over state laws as well. The biggest objectors to this plan are the smaller states who did not like the idea of representation in the legislature being determined by population. This would give more power to large states like Virginia and New York and Massachusetts, and less power to states like Rhode Island and New Jersey, which is why we soon thereafter have the New Jersey plan proposed, which would create a legislature where representation is equal. This plan also created a government that had greater taxation powers and more power to regulate trade than under the Articles of Confederation. This is in part to the fact that a lot of these smaller states that supported the New Jersey plan depended more heavily on commerce than some other states. This political cartoon is from about 8 years ago. I don't know why it looks like it's President Obama, but I think that's just coincidence. It's not supposed to be President Obama. So we have the Constitutional Convention divided over the issue of representation in Congress. And the solution is known as the Great Compromise, or sometimes the Connecticut Compromise, because delegates from Connecticut proposed it. And here was the solution. We would have a two-house legislature. One house, the Senate, would have equal representation for all states. Small states like New Jersey would get 2 senators. Large states like Virginia would get 2 senators in the Senate. The House of Representatives would have representation based on population. Large states like Virginia would get more representatives and have more power in the House. Small states like New Jersey would have less representation, and fewer people. And an important thing that was included is that all tax bills must originate in the House. And the reason for this is that the House is more representative of the American people. It has the one where representation is determined by population, and the House will be directly elected by the people. Originally, senators were chosen by the state assemblies, and it will remain that way until the early 1900s. Another issue that threatens to divide the convention is the issue of slavery. Some of the Northerners completely abhorred the institution of slavery. Some Southerners are strongly defending it. Most of the people at the convention see slavery not as the primary issue of the convention. So they want to just come up with a solution that allows them to continue to make progress on forming a new government without having the issue of slavery completely derail all the progress that they've made. So Southern states want slaves to be counted for representation. Northern states do not. So the solution that's reached is that every 5 slaves would count as 3 free persons. In other words, a slave would count as 3/5 of a person. This is called the 3/5 compromise, and it's something that does not make the United States look very good today. Slavery, for most of the convention, is that 500-pound gorilla in the room. It's rarely mentioned by name. As Northern opposition to the institution of slavery is growing, Southerners threaten to leave the convention if slavery is at all weakened. What is put into the Constitution is that the slave trade will not be discussed until at least 1808. And a fugitive slave law is put in place that says that slaves that escape will be returned to their owners. Northerners see the creation of a national government as more important, and they think that they'll just deal with slavery later. The cynical reason for why they took this perspective is that Northerners benefited more from a stronger national government than they would have benefited from slavery being abolished at this time. Also, a lot of people felt that slavery wasn't going to last very long. This is prior to the invention of the cotton gin, and many people thought slavery would be done and over with pretty soon. One of the last decisions that they make is to have the president be elected by the Electoral College. Now, some people suggested having Congress elect the president, but they thought, no, we want to have the executive branch truly be independent from the legislative branch. We want to have checks and balances in place, and that's too much overlap. Why not have the American people directly elect the president? Why go through the step of having the Electoral College? The reason the Founding Fathers put the Electoral College in place is they didn't fully trust the public to always elect the right candidate for president. So, if the dum-dums in America ever elected a professional wrestler to be the president, then the Electoral College could step in and say, that person's not qualified, and actually vote for somebody else. The president is given veto power over laws passed by Congress. The president is also given the power to appoint judges. And both of these powers, veto power and appointing judges, is very significant because 10 years before, these were some of the things that royal governors were doing that were making colonists the most mad. This is unthinkable 10 years before. But the fact that they gave these powers to one person in this new government really shows that the Americans understood at this time that they needed a strong executive branch for this new government to work. So, how are they going to ratify the Constitution? The Constitution is finished. The Constitution has been created. What has to happen for it to become the law of the land? Well, they could send it to state legislatures to have them ratify it. And if 3/4 of the state legislatures ratified it, then it would become a new law. However, they chose not to do that because remember, under the Articles of Confederation, the state legislatures had a lot of power. They're probably not going to sign off on this Constitution, which dramatically decreases the amount of power they have. So instead, Special ratifying conventions were held where people sent delegates to a meeting in their state to vote yes or no on the Constitution. And once 9 states approved, then the Constitution was ratified. This is part of the reason why the Constitution starts "We the people" and not "We the states."